And in 2 or 3 years, this is going to be a very dangerous team. But like you said, I personally think the Bulls were the second best team in the conference. I mean, they were the team that was able to force the Cavs the most, the Hawks with a lackluster sweep, getting absolutely destroyed by the Cavaliers. But it's going to be tough. You go up against a Bulls team that has a group that's played together with Noah, Butler, Rose, guys who are established. Pau Gasol, a veteran, lots of veteran players. The Cavs, when you have LeBron James, I don't even have to go with Kevin Love or Kyrie Irving. When you have LeBron James, it puts you in a class of your own. And like you said, Paul George is a guy who's a legitimate threat. And the Pistons, even though I think they aren't a great team, they still have Reggie Jackson, and they still have Andre Drummond, who's a guy who knows Greg Monroe very well, a team that's going to be able to, I think, neutralize him pretty well. So it's going to be a tough run. I do see them falling in after the Hawks. I think they probably fall in after Hawks, Bulls, Cavs, and Raptors, and I think they're going to be competing after that in that little group with the Pacers and the other teams in there. You know, I think really the Pacers probably. Maybe if the Celtics can make some steps forward as a young team, but I do think they have a very good shot. I think they'll be back in the playoffs. But as you said, you land in the 6th spot, and you're going to get either the Hawks, the Bulls, or the Cavs, which are all very difficult matchups. So they've got a tough test. You get in the 5th seed, you're fine. You're in a much better spot. But
the Bucks right now, they're in where I like to call like NBA purgatory, because they're making the playoffs and they have a good team.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's where the Celtics were last season, and it's where the Celtics will continue to be. If you're just barely making the playoffs, or you're in the 6 to 8 spot, you're going to lose in the playoffs, whether it's first or second round. I mean, I can't remember the last time an 8 or a 7 won a playoff series. I don't think the Bucks are there. I think they're in the 6 or 5, but I don't think that's much better. I mean, obviously 5 is better than 6, because 5, if they pull the upset over the 4, then they give a good series against the 1.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just a long process in the NBA, and unless you're getting big players through the drafting, which obviously isn't going to happen if you're making the playoffs, but if you're making these tiny moves in the offseason, like getting Greg Monroe, you're taking small steps in the right direction. I like where the Bucks are going. I don't think they'll be legitimate threats for the next couple of years, but give them 3 or 4 years, I think they'll be up there.
All right, and lastly, the biggest story, and I have this in the script, it's basically its own segment apart from NBA signings. DeAndre Jordan is headed back to the LA Clippers after basically being a Dallas Maverick for like a good 2 days. Probably one of the more entertaining sagas I've seen, and it was pretty crazy. So DeAndre Jordan, of course, he was ready to go to Dallas, and then he started to have second thoughts, which ended up becoming a meeting with players playing video games together, and an Lakers exec basically leaving and saying, it's a done deal. I wouldn't leave if it wasn't. So Jordan headed back and sparked memes, emojis, Chris Broussard using Wheaties boxes as his sources. Mark Cuban, the Cuban brothers, basically, against Chris Broussard in a little Twitter spat. Also, with Chris Broussard, by the way, fine source. So Chris Broussard, just for some backstory, said that he had sources telling him that Mark Cuban was driving around downtown Houston, begging DeAndre Jordan's family for his address. And
no, not just DeAndre Jordan's family. He was asking everyone on the street.
Yeah, everyone. And Jordan, first of all, Cuban's brother came out and just basically bashed him, saying it's absolutely ridiculous. And Mark Cuban said, this is not true. This is a blatant lie. And Broussard says, no, my sources are telling me this. And he's like, look, if you can present me with actual proof, Cuban has promised to donate $100,000 to the charity of Broussard's choice. So Broussard's got a lot on him right now. If he can do it, that's a big deal. That's a lot of money.
Absolutely. But you gotta protect your sources, though. If you're Chris Broussard, you can't go donate money to charity. You can't afford that.
And that's the thing that's always I think shrouded Chris Broussard is always it's what are his sources. He's never had that source. For me, I'm still gonna go back to the Wheaties box. I mean, he probably is that guy that reads those really like those blogs that he sees. The really the hack blogs that you see random 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds. I think that DeAndre Jordan is going to go to the Boston Celtics because I like the Celtics. That's his source. The real
Did you hear him on SportsCenter today?
No, I did not actually.
So it was only a quick segment. I mean, he was in there talking about free agency, and then they brought up this whole Mark Cuban, denial thing, and Chris Broussard goes, "Oh yeah, well, Mark Cuban's obviously in a state of denial. Denial's natural." And then later he just goes, I stand by my sources. He wasn't budging at all. It was hilarious. It was awesome. And I mean, if you look at this is such a small part of the DeAndre Jordan saga. Like, yesterday was one of the best days on Twitter that I can remember, because we talked a little bit about this before we went on air, but the number of star players that were tweeting about the same player was just unbelievable. I mean, you have CP3 tweeting the banana boat emojis after that whole picture came out with him and LeBron James on a banana boat. Mm-hmm. You have Paul Pierce basically looking like an old guy who has no idea what he's doing, tweeting a picture of an emoji instead of just an emoji. I mean, when I saw that, I just pictured him, like, with his glasses, asking his children how to figure out how to use this computer thing in his handheld phone. Mm-hmm. And then you have Blake Griffin, who was hysterical, with the whole chair in front of the door, the tent outside. And then you had, I saw Barstool Big Cat tweeted at Blake Griffin. He said, at Blake Griffin, like, what card game are you playing with DeAndre Jordan right now, and does he know that you're letting him win?
Big Cat.
And Blake Griffin responds, "Go fish, it's getting pretty rowdy," or something like that. It was just awesome. Everything was awesome.
Love Big Cat. Pretended to be a member of the Blackhawks and ended up going around with them for the whole night.
But then you got Chandler Parsons too.
Yeah, I mean, and just to really quickly go back to the emoji war, it ended up getting to the point where Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan had the point where Kobe Bryant tweeted out 5 championship emojis, and Michael Jordan came back with the 6. I would have loved to see Bill.
And he had the goat emoji.
Yeah, and I would love to see Bill Russell come back, and he doesn't have a Twitter, but have a Twitter and just put all 11 right there. Just, oh my god. It got so out of control.
Can you imagine if he made a Twitter and tweeted that, and then that was it? Like, that was it for Bill Russell on Twitter?
Yeah. That would have been
terrific. Can you imagine that?
That would have been terrific.
would have gone nuts.
Thank God Phil Jackson didn't get involved. Phil Jackson's been really struggling from the point where he tweeted out, "How's it goink?" Which they then decided to say that it was actually something. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is totally a New York thing." Plenty of people say that. And he went on to basically try to justify it, which was ridiculous. Yeah. But thank God he didn't get involved. But you're right, Chandler Parsons was not happy, calling DeAndre Jordan disrespectful. He called him unprofessional. Chandler Parsons was not happy one bit. I mean, this is a guy who was involved all the way with DeAndre Jordan. You know, he was part of it. You know, he walked him through step by step. Basically, I guess his tour guide to a certain extent of the Dallas Mavericks. This is what he said via ESPN Dallas, Tim McMahon. I'm shocked, very disappointed and frustrated, disrespected. This is something I've never seen in my career, and I know that it doesn't happen very often. When a man gives you his word and an organization his word, especially when that organization put in so much effort, and I walked him through this process and was very, very open and willing to work with him, it's just unethical and disrespectful. There's a lot more, but basically saying that he was very randomly responding to him. He wasn't being very respectful. He wasn't being very communicative. And I can understand from a Mavericks point of view where you'd be very angry.
Absolutely.
And to be fair, I wouldn't want to put Mark Cuban on my bad side, so DeAndre Jordan should watch his back. It's going to be interesting.
With the whole Chandler Parsons thing, I just feel bad for the guy because... Yeah. I mean, from what I've read and from what I've heard about him, he seems like a pretty stand-up guy. I mean, he shaved his head a couple years ago when he was on the Rockets for a kid with cancer. I mean, he's not, out in the news doing bad stuff or, creating a bad image of himself. Yeah. He seems like a pretty stand-up guy. And he had a couple funny tweets, but if I were in his shoes, or if I were in Mark Cuban's shoes, I wouldn't be happy. If I were in a Mavericks fan's shoes, I wouldn't be happy.
Yeah.
Because a verbal agreement and a handshake obviously doesn't mean as much to DeAndre Jordan as it did to Mark Cuban and it did to Chandler Parsons. I feel bad for Chandler Parsons because he could have been playing alongside DeAndre Jordan. I think that would have been, a potent combination. Yeah. I think that, and another thing about the Mavericks, this would have helped them make the playoffs. I don't think they'll make the playoffs without DeAndre Jordan. Yeah. I think with DeAndre Jordan, they could have been in that 5 to 8 range, anywhere in there, depending on, how the other teams did or injuries, stuff like that happened. But if I were Mark Cuban too, I mean, I feel bad for them. I do feel bad for Dallas fans, but as a Boston Celtics fan, this actually helps us because in the trade with Rondo, we got their first-round pick. So I think that if DeAndre Jordan stayed with the Mavericks, that would have been a lower teens pick or towards the end of the first round. But now that DeAndre Jordan isn't on that team, I don't see the Mavericks making the playoffs, and that pick could become a top 10 pick, which would be huge for the Celtics.
And it also ended up making it so they're maxing out Wesley Matthews' contract, and I really don't think that's a great decision, to be honest. I think Wesley Matthews is a good player. They're putting themselves in a position where him and Parsons are now the stars after Dirk, and while I think both of them are great, I don't think either of them are championship-winning stars. I don't think they can be...
Completely.
I don't think they're the number players. They also missed out on Tyson Chandler, of course. They're losing Chandler, which is a big blow to this team. Yep. Big kudos to the Celtics for getting rid of Rajon Rondo. That guy's a mess. This is the guy who at one point was probably going to be the best free agent this year and has turned into a guy who essentially nobody really wants for more than a year. He's going to the Kings on such a small deal, which makes me question George Karl, to be fair, because he's a guy who's like, I don't like DeMarcus Cousins because he's immature, and then brought in Rondo, who's the definition of immaturity.
Oh, absolutely. And the only time Rondo really excelled on the Celtics and in the NBA in general is when he had Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and Kevin Garnett keeping him under control. I mean, without them, he's just been an unmitigated disaster. I mean, on the Mavericks, in his press conference, there was a reporter that asked him what it felt like to choose Dallas, and he responded with, I didn't choose to be here. Like, from the moment he was there, he just made it clear, like, I don't really care. I'm not going to try that hard. Mm-hmm. You know, I could care less. And on the Kings, are you kidding me? Do you think he's going to have, like, a breakout season or, like, show this, grit that he did in Boston when he had Kevin Garnett on his team? I don't see it. I think the Kings and Rondo and Cousins and Karl, that's just going to be...
I think it's actually unfortunate for DeMarcus Cousins because I do think that guy's taking some steps forward in terms of maturity. Yeah. And I think that now he's being put in this position where you bring in another guy who's immature and he's kind of being pushed out the door. This is a guy who I personally wanted the Bulls. I think we should make a deal to get rid of... And I know everybody loves Jimmy Butler, but I've always been a guy who thinks that we should bring in DeMarcus Cousins. I think it's time to create a new face because this is a guy who's an incredible basketball player and just needs that little bit extra bit of guidance. And it seems like he never gets that coach that's actually willing to give him that extra bit of guidance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's unfortunate for him. But finishing up DeAndre Jordan, we've had some crazy sagas. We've had some really weird ones. One of them, of course, being... I mean, this is one we haven't even touched on, but Luke Ridnour getting traded, 4 times in a week? It's unreal, like, how many times he's been traded. That's a little more depressing than funny. I would.
I agree.
Can you imagine being, honey, we're moving to Milwaukee. Oh, never mind, we're moving to the Thunder. We're going this way. I wonder if he actually bought like any plane tickets or houses anywhere. I think that would be interesting if he was actually.
I hope he didn't.
That would be so unfortunate.
Can you imagine him like calling like new plane ticket and new house every single time, like 4 times? Just like, sorry, I have to sell that house. It's only been an hour. Yeah, sorry. I got traded again.
That's unfortunate. I mean, you can't complain when you're an NBA player. You're making a pretty decent amount.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But where do you think this ranks? In terms of the craziest or most entertaining ones or sagas you've seen?
Honestly, they're hard to compare, but I think this is right up there with LeBron James and Dwight Howard. I mean, with LeBron James, it was really just the whole decision thing that everyone was freaking out about, which was, an hour long, and then he decided at the end, and everyone went nuts. This was like a day of tweets from star players. I mean, CP3, Paul Pierce, Chandler Parsons, JJ Redick. You have Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan all pitching in with the same stuff. And the aftermath has been absurd. I mean, the whole Broussard Cuban thing, and this whole just everyone attacking DeAndre Jordan, him not answering his phone calls. With LeBron James, it was just like, how immature that he's going on TV to tell everyone where he's going.
Yeah.
With Dwight Howard, it was no one knows where the heck he is going. But with this, it was like, it was 2 sides, right? You knew it was either Dallas or LA, and it was just a war between them to see which players could convince him to say, which people on like each side of, it was basically like a game of tug of war. Like, LA had Blake Griffin, CP3, Paul Pierce, Steve Ballmer, Doc Rivers. And if you look at who Dallas had, it was pretty much just Chandler Parsons and the Cuban brothers. Yeah. It was a crazy day. I was refreshing Twitter constantly. I think this is the craziest I've seen.